And we knew it would work. We knew the planter would do it. There isn't a planter made today that wouldn't do it. And I always say, if you can no-till Napanee clay, you can no-till anything.
You kind of have to not constrain yourself to a label too much and not let it be a gospel that thou shalt never put any sort of tillage into the field, but it's a very strong guideline.
I mean, I started heading for no-till 30 years before we did it, because I could see that we had to do something different, and I just had to figure out what and how.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Winning with No-Till. Today we're at Kaiser Lake Farm south of Napanee on the Hay Bay, and I've got Eric and Rob and Max with me to talk about their adventures in no-till farming. And they are a little bit of a twist from the other ones in the series in that they bring livestock into the equation, and we'll talk about that and manure management and such. So I'll replace this picture with a video as well, Rob, but maybe talk about the unit and how you apply the manure and what's your spacing and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a Noon quad train and it's pulled by the TJ325. The quad train is, it's like 20 something years old now.
19.
Yeah, 19. And Dad used to pull it with a Massey 4840 from the early 80s, which Grandpa used to push up all those diversion berms. And it was starting to get underpowered, so it was replaced a couple years before I started driving it. And I don't know, I kind of like the TJ cab, but it's I think it's 8,000 gallons together, the unit.
8,000 US.
Yeah, US gallons. And 1,800 gallons to the acre. I'm only doing 4 or 5 acres a load. So I'll be out there for 10, 15 minutes at a time and then run back to fill up. And luckily we have so much land, so compact together, I never have to drive more than a mile either direction.
Which makes manure application a lot more reasonable economically and time-wise compared to a lot of guys with manure.
Exactly.
Yeah, like I said earlier, this is all I know, and that is something I think about while I'm doing it, is how much running around I'm doing right back to the pit. And I'll see guys in town who have, the big stack of dry manure sitting in the field, and it stinks, obviously, as I drive by it, and I think, man, that stinks in multiple ways.
Yeah.
When you do this, Rob, do you change how full you fill the tankers in terms of the length of the field that you're going to go on, so that you're not doubling back or having to go full over something that's already been spread to start again?
It depends. For the most part, I'll just fill it up full, and oftentimes in a lot of fields there'll be enough variation in length in different parts of the field that I can just make it work to get a full load out, or I'll come back slightly less than empty. But for the most part, I'm trying to minimize how much I'm driving around out there in the field, and especially avoiding doubling over land because just of the weight that I'm pulling around.
Yeah, the tractor has GPS guidance.
Understood.
So you can parallel track, so you don't have to turn short at the end. You can do it in lands.
Yeah.
The second thing is that tanker has rate control and
There's a flow meter on it and a rate controller, and so we can it's getting a little old, and we're working on upgrading for next year. Rob basically ran it manual this year.
Yeah.
So but we can monitor at least what's going out. So even manual, you can tweak it in a little bit. And it's not auto steer, but it does give you the guidance to help you. And then of course the wheat has been planted with steering, so the wheat's extremely straight, so it makes it easy for any other operation, spraying, harvesting, or manure spreading. You've got a very straight crop to drive in.
We have a couple of features which are relevant. 3, we have internal driveways which are straight, level, and no potholes. So you can drive your van back Highway 13, which is the one that goes straight back to center here for 1.25 miles at highway speeds, at the same speed you go on the 401, because it's smooth and flat and straight. And in fact, we've had airplanes land and take off off our driveways. And the second thing we have, and what shows in that picture, is a grass strip. And we use a couple of them to divide the farm and make access easier. So you go from one driveway to another driveway across the grass strip and don't have to drive as far to go all the way around the back.
Mm-hmm.
And the third thing we have are grass waterways. And they're like everything else, systematically tiled and thick grass. And the two main ones on the farm here have been here for more than 40 years. So they're well-established grass strips. Their primary purpose, of course, is to carry spring runoff without causing erosion, and they do that. But they provide good traffic areas for that, and the grain wagons and the planters and
The other thing that does that Dad didn't talk about, with all the neighbors, people buy a half an acre out in the country and they say, oh, I live in the country, I'm going to go get an ATV or side-by-side. Well, where are they going to ride? So these are handy for us to go out and inspect crops. They're handy for us to access the fields and haul away from the fields. But they're also handy for just going for a ride. And so a lot of the neighbors go out and we say grass and gravel. Well, there's a lot of grass and gravel on this farm, and they can go all over the place and not backtrack. You can spend 2 hours driving and never drive in the same place twice. And so, not that that's what it's for, but the spin-off is they're satisfied and don't need to cut across the field because they can cut across the grass between the fields instead. And we don't, so that's why we're enjoying very little impact in the fields from non-farm, even non-permitted visitors, because these spots are there. And
there was a guy out walking his dog as I came down the road this
exactly.
morning.
And one of the things we learned a couple of years ago, and I had Rob do it last year for me, there's a couple of spots where you can basically drive the whole perimeter of the farm on grass.
Yeah.
I don't
That's
like
just the top corner of that picture is the woods next door.
Yep.
And you can see the green grass strip.
Mm-hmm.
Those green grass strips go all the way around. Nothing's going to grow there of any consequence anyway, so we just
Understood.
let it be grass.
Yeah.
Sorry, Max.
but we don't want to see the snowmobiles cut across the wheat field, for
Right.
example.
Right.
So we just go out with our little survey flags, those little whip flags, and we mark the edge of the field. And then we also try to get out as soon as there's snowfall and make a track. And once the track's there, we get snowmobiles come halfway from town, they run up the shoulder of the road, they cut across the field and they go out the other side. They follow our track or they stay on the track and they stay outside the flags, and it actually works. It's a tiny little bit of facilitation. And I mean, you go to far eastern Ontario or other parts where they have snowmobile clubs and they ride here and there. We don't have that activity. But once we have these, they have a spot to go and they stay off of the cropland.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's move ahead a little bit back to sort of the no-till side of things. And this is where sort of one of the big wins in no-till comes, is the lesser amount of equipment that needs to be in the inventory. So what are those pieces of equipment that make a no-till system work?
Planter, combine, and sprayer. End of story.
Yep. Planter, combine, sprayer, and tires.
Okay, and that's an interesting thing because on no-tilled ground, you have much more carrying capacity of equipment than you would in tilled ground. And yet my no-tillers that I've been talking to as part of this seem to be, on average, more conscious of compaction than other people, and spend the money on the tires and be very careful about the PSIs and the weight distribution and stuff like that. Maybe
So you get two parts to that. In no-till, the top 6 to 8 inches is more air than in a conventional tillage. And so when you drive across it with even a pickup truck with 40 pounds in the tires,
if not 70 or 80
or more, and if it's a heavy piece of equipment with high pressure, you crush that surface. And so the compaction is more surface. You get it in the depths too, but the impact in the surface is more obvious and greater because you've expanded it with all those old root pores and wormholes and everything else, and then you crush it with a heavy load or a hard tire. And vertical tillage, those are all steel wheels, so that's one of the reasons why we don't like them, because it's a gang of steel wheels. They're compaction tools. But the other thing you get is you get ruts.
Right.
If you're no-till, when are you going to till out the ruts?
Oh, where's the fix?
We don't have that opportunity to fix them. If we make a rut harvesting corn and next spring we're planting beans with a no-till planter, where do we fix the rut? So now you've created a situation where you just compromised everything because you got to go out there and rip it up and level it out. The best way to fix a rut is not make it. And so the tires become important. The combine has those high flexion tires on it, and they're inflated to the right pressure. So that's two parts. You get the right tire, but you also have to set it to the right pressure. The tractor has more tires. The planters, even where the new planter, not so much. But I know on our old planter, we upped the tire size to give it a better footprint because you could feel them in the sprayer when you cross the path. The sprayer, yeah, there's some compromises in the sprayer depending on whether it's in crop or early season. Early season, even the sprayer's running at 14 psi. Show me another sprayer in the province that runs at 14 psi.
Yeah.
Those are, so yes, planter, sprayer, combine, and tires on each of them too.
My question is, when you are searching for that combine, or especially the planter, is it a different buying decision than if you were doing it in a conventional tillage situation?
As I told you, we use a 1978 Cyclo 400 to plant the sweet corn. It does a fantastic job, and it is a long way from a no-till planter. So in 2020, when we bought the planter, the white planter, we bought one that had heavy iron, heavier bushings. Everything about it was strong and sturdy to put up with the pressure that was going to be needed to penetrate the ground. And at the time, 400 pounds per row unit was necessary. Now, as we've gone through all this time and migration and evolution of the soil structure, you can penetrate a lot easier, especially if you're putting less on it.
Okay.
So if you're only doing a narrow double disc opener pass, that's not a lot on contacting the surface, so you don't need a lot of pressure behind it. So based on the old corn planter, when we went shopping, or I guess I mostly did it last summer, I found a Case early riser planter because it was a narrow trench, simple planter. Did it have to be a big, heavy piece of equipment pushing that down in the ground? No, it doesn't anymore. Same thing with the sunflower drill that does all of our wheat and most of our beans. The thing I like about the sunflower is the parallel linkage for the depth control. It does a very nice job of keeping that row unit straight and level in the ground. And then the third piece in my shopping and in my logic was the time that Dad used to put into planting and the time that I put into planting. As time goes by, we're no different than the rest of society seeking a better life-work balance.
Yes.
And what my next generation will do versus what I would do. I remember a few years ago I was planting corn and it was 12 o'clock and it was going to rain at 1 and I needed 5 more acres of seed. Then I went ripping up the road at 12 o'clock and I get a text from Robbie and he says, go to bed, because it was midnight. Well, it rained at 1 o'clock, so I was right to stay out and get it done. But the point to all of that was we got to get it done in a reasonable time. And so I bought a 16-row planter that was 10 years old, but we can plant in a few days of reasonable day length. And we can also do it at 5 miles an hour, which is a good speed for the iron to follow the ground and get the seed down in a good way, rather than pounding along at 8 or 10 miles an hour and trying to get it done in 8 days. I used to have a rule: if you could plant in 4 days, you spent too much. And if it took you more than 10 days, you didn't spend enough on your planter.
Okay.
Well, we can do it in 5.
All right.
Easily. 5 reasonable days. Short for a farmer, but still 10 or 11 hour days, but not 5, 14, 16, 18 hour days. So those are all kind of the decisions that go into it.
With the sprayer, it's not a very big sprayer, and is that a conscious decision as well in terms of not carrying a lot of weight out there for how many times a sprayer has to go across the field nowadays?
We in 1997 we got our first self-propelled sprayer. It was a 220 spray coupe, 200 gallon, 60-foot boom. That thing did the farm, and at the time we were like 800-900 acres. We're now a little over 1,100 acres, and it could do it. It sometimes meant to get over the corn crop, it took 2 days. The wheat, you might squeeze it out in a day and a half, day and a quarter. So when we went shopping for another one, I wanted something with a little better technology, a little better engine. That was an old gas engine, and it was light. It was 4,000 pounds empty. The Spray Coupe 4655 that we have is a higher clearance sprayer. It's about 8,000 pounds empty, so about 12,000 full. It's a 400-gallon tank, so right off the bat, it's twice the volume. So we can spend more time spraying and less time filling.
Is there anything different in this new to you combine that it sets you up for no-till any differently?
For no-till, so the new combine was a couple things for me. It was a bigger tank, so it holds more grain. Not a lot bigger, but somewhat. It was a bigger throughput. When we went with an irrigation system, I mean, we've seen 300 bushel corn in small pockets of fields before. We've seen a farm average of over 200. Having the throughput is important. With an 8-row head, you're putting a lot through on a per acre basis. So that was part of it. Did it affect no-till per se? Not really. It's more about the field size and the field machine and honestly what's available. You can't get a class 3 combine anymore. A class 4. This is class 7, 8.
Yeah.
So it's sort of mid-size now. But the throughput of it, 115 bushel wheat last summer at 3.2 miles an hour on a 25-foot head. This year I was at 2.7 on a 35-foot head, just pounding along, and it's just happy as can be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
And one thing I've said all along is the most important piece of equipment you have is the combine, because you see the effect of every acre on the farm. If you're getting it custom harvested, you miss all that.
You missed that.
That's one of the best crop management tools you have is the combine.
Even more so than the sprayer.
Yep.
The one other thing is it does have auto steer. So when I get into the beans and the wheat, with that bigger head, the auto steer is certainly a nice thing, but it also gives you a little more time. Instead of watching the end of the head and make sure you're not leaving or whatever, you're watching the ground a lot more. I can stop worrying about where I'm going and start looking at where I am.
So, the key components of the system, and Eric, I'm going to get you to read off your 9 keys, and then we'll talk about it in the context of this.
Okay, well, as I said, the first thing I did to do with farming was taking out the fence lines. That was irrelevant at that point. Tile drainage. Tile drainage in this soil is absolutely essential. You can't farm it without. We're systematically tiled in universal 1,150 acres of wall-to-wall pipe. Modified no-till. Modified is the incorporation of the cover crop seed and manure. Crop rotation. Well, of course, when we, for 40 years, made our own feed, we wanted corn and wheat. And the soybeans was a break crop, if you will, for all of the reasons that you use it. The manure, absolutely essential. It for again all the reasons we mentioned already, nutrients and organic matter, mixed cover. Again, I gotta come back to one of my original comments was that erosion control because of the 100-foot vertical fall across the farm, and organic matter contribution. It's significant to maintaining the organic matter. Soil life, erosion control, grass waterways, dams, inlets, and the diversion berms are something that I never hear talked about anywhere, and we have them all. We have, I don't know how many, but they're all over the place. Anywhere there's a water course, grass water course next to a driveway, or next to the grass waterways themselves. You put in the diversion berm. I remember going to a no-till conference in the States, the National No-Till Conference, and listening to Marion Kelmers talking about having to fill in the ruts next to the grass waterway. Well, if you put diversion berms there, you won't have those ruts because the water only goes a short distance and goes onto the grass. And so we have a lot of them here, and I built them with that blade you saw in the other picture on the old 4840. The mixed cover is, we've told you all the reasons we like it. We're not going to switch to a single or 2 species cover crop. We like the mixed cover for a lot of reasons. Then to get to the other things, fence line removal, we started doing that right away when we came here. We hired a big D8 dozer and he piled it all up. We've since got rid of the piles. But removing the fence lines does more than one thing. First of all, it enlarges the fields, of course. And secondly, it reduces the headlands. And when we had that soil network tour, 3 weeks ago, whenever it was, we went out to the edge of the road, the layer barn, to look at the cover crop, and there was an arc at the driveway where, I mean, there's no other way. He's got to go somewhere to get there, and so where he drove more, it's the ruts are obvious. The cover crop is thinner than it is on the rest of the field, and so if you have less headlands, you have less headland compaction too. Plant early. Max has mentioned it several times. We start planting in April. Harvest early. You get corn stalk breakdown in October, some in early November, none in December, January, February, and very little in March. And we want to plant in April. When we go out to plant soybeans and corn stalks in April, there's mostly bare ground and the stalks sticking up, however high, foot or 12, 15, 18 inches. But the soil life can break down that residue. An essential part of that is the Chalmers BT chopper. I've had 4 different corn head choppers on the farm. There's only one, the Chalmers BT. Chops it in little pieces. And the other significant thing it does is it shatters the top of the standing stalk that's left behind.
Actually, I have a picture of that right
and
here.
reduces the tire damage.
Mm-hmm.
So the tire damage is not significant with the Chalmers corn head. And again, for the soybeans, we plant late group 0, early group 1. We have 3,340 average heat units here for the last 10-year average. We could plant group 2 soybeans just fine. My experience with the plots over the years is that the extra yield is insignificant, a bushel or 2, and the detriment to planting wheat in October is much, much greater. It's better to have it planted in September. So if we can get it planted in September, we'd prefer it. We want it, for sure, we want it done by Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And compaction is a big deal. We mentioned the tires, plant spray, harvest. The manure we only spread in late July, early August, when the soil is the driest most years. Let's get a hurricane. But so you have less compaction from hauling that big tanker around. Mm-hmm. And as Max said, it's essential that you consider the tires. We put the first big low pressure tires on the old TR95 25 years ago. And I heard people commenting, or reports of people commenting, I don't know, Kaiser's got that great big combine with those great big tires, and I don't know what the hell's the point of that. The point of that is pretty obvious. Mm-hmm. And then the 10th one I added afterwards, and that's irrigation. The storms come from the southwest. I don't know what that was. From Michigan across to southwestern Ontario, past Toronto, and they run out of daylight, energy, sunlight. And so by the time they get here, we either don't get any, or we don't get much, or it goes north of us, or sometimes south of us over the lake. And so last year, for example, Max mentioned how dry it was when we were planting wheat. We went from the 14th of August to the 10th of October with none rain, not a drop for that whole period. And so after we planted the wheat, it wasn't going to come up. So we ran this irrigation system around the circle, and you could see, well, you saw it.
And I'll show them a video.
You could
of that
see
as
the
well.
difference in the wheat establishment, and that appeared to show at the harvest. Although because it's random or irregular across fields, it's hard to measure from a fallings. She asked me, would we see a difference? Well, we certainly could see a difference, but you couldn't measure it because we're not a research farm.
Right.
And that didn't work. But and so because we're a big block, we've got a 520-acre circle. Takes 2 days to go around the circle to put 3/4 of an inch of water on.
And interestingly enough, it's not Like it has to cover more than one crop when
Yeah,
it's doing that.
doesn't matter. It's either wheat in season, corn or soybeans, or a cover crop. They'll all benefit from that little bit of extra water.
So when you consider those things and thinking of the 3 generations of you sitting here relative to the list that I've been talking to people about, we've addressed all of the ones except for a couple. One is patience, and I'm interested in how each of the 3 of you sort of talk together, and Molly too, when she's in the combination here, in terms of when things start or when you have to pull the plug because the conditions are right. How do you deal with this patience thing?
I suck at patience. I wake up in the morning and I have a vision of what I'm doing, or I started like 3 days ago. On Tuesday we're doing this, and then it rained on Monday afternoon. I'm like, son of a gun. And so patience is not my virtue. In moments it can be, but in general, I tend to move a little faster than I should. And Robbie is far better at it, and he will be better when the time comes to wait that extra day.
Do you see them pushing too early, Rob, and you try and hold them back, or
I don't know. It depends on the exact topic, I suppose.
It's something that all farmers deal with.
but some better than others,
Yeah.
as Max just sort of pointed out.
Well, we have the added disadvantage or consideration, if you will, of the soil type. You know, you can do things in Middlesex loam that you can't do here.
Yeah, but I also know that the way we're planting and the way we've got the planter set up to be such minimum disturbance that all we really need is a dry surface. So
Right.
if you can look down and say it looks dry from here, we can probably go.
Because you're not pulling that wet stuff below up. Yeah, and you're soft enough on your weight in that you're not crushing that.
Right. The problem I have is I'll look at a few key areas of the field and think, okay, you know what? These areas are all good. I know that wet spot's over there, but I know it's such a small percentage. We'll get by. But the truth is, in hindsight, I can almost always look back and say, if I'd waited one day, that corner would have gone better. But I'm also looking at the other fields and the days we have and whatever, and so it's always a balance point.
Understood.
But I do have the patience enough to say it's still sticky on the surface. We can't go yet.
Okay.
But I'll tend to push those corners or those spots because we're close enough, and we'll tiptoe over those ones.
And the other one that we haven't addressed is weed control. You talked about the sprayer and that, but you didn't really talk about weed control. Is your weed control a different animal to deal with than your conventional neighbors have to deal with?
Well, certainly there's some differences there. I think that Dad always had a really low tolerance for weeds in the field, and so I inherited that. And I also have, like I said, I also have the business side of it where I say, yeah, well, I've been over that field 2 or 3 times, and yes, there's foxtail escapes because it rains every week, and that's going to feed the grasses. And at this point, there's no economic benefit, only cost to spraying. But then I get to a point where it's like, son of a gun, those weeds got to go. And so, you know, having said that, the plan is usually a good plan of let's get it early, get the field clean, and keep it clean. So whether that's a one pass where it's got a whole lot of things in the tank, or it's a 2 pass and we're balancing a little bit, the dollars play into it, but ultimately we want a clean field.
100%. And the other one that we haven't really talked about here is like less equipment on the farm in terms of field and stuff, but you know, does it take more maintenance and setup to make sure that that's ready to go when it's go time?
It takes setup, it takes maintenance. When we look at the planters, we don't wait for the disc openers to fall off. We don't wait for the bearings to go. We go on the dimension. If the disc openers are wearing down, it's time for them to go, and that's simply the way it is. And by the same token, we can justify throwing out a disc opener that's worn down 1/2 inch because we're not buying plowshares, and we're not buying a second tractor, and we're not paying a third person to drive and all those other things. But the planter, I think these guys will agree with me, when you open the seed bag, you got 100% potential in the bag. The first thing you do with it is plant it. If you don't do the best job on every acre planting, you're cutting off the potential on the first step.
Yep.
And so, yes, there's some setup, and yes, there's some management. Having said that, one of the benefits of really high clay and silt is very little sand, and sand is the abrasive one.
Okay, the
And
clay is
so
not as hard on the equipment.
clay is hard. If there's a rock in it and you hit the rock, you'll break things. But the clay doesn't sand away the points. The points last longer. And we've seen that many, many times over, where the cultivator points will easily last 300 to 400 acres because there's no sand there to grind them down.
So we talked a little bit about the Calmer's header and what that does, but maybe, and I'm not sure that I don't have pictures of it here, but talk about the draper and how you're managing straw off the back of the wheat and the soybeans to get the uniformity of distribution that you want.
That was one of the incentives to go back to New Holland. We ran New Holland for 37 years, the same machine. And so we knew it. We knew the advantages of it. And the International was a single rotor. The chopper was up in the middle of the combine, not at the back. It didn't do all the things as well as the New Holland did. The New Holland, the grain tank was wider, and so it didn't have to be as high. The chopper was in the back of the combine instead of up in the middle, so it was infinitely more suitable for chopping up the straw or not.
And like you said about the planter setup and the planter maintenance, the straw chopper is no different. It's got the more aggressive knives in it, and they get replaced. Chopping the straw, tuning those fins on the back for the spread. With a 35-foot draper, we can't quite get that, but we get close. And if the wind is blowing straw into the wind doesn't work very well. So you will get some, but the goal is to cover the width. And when it was a 16-foot head, that was easy. When it was a 25-foot head, it wasn't very hard. Every foot you go wider, it gets harder incrementally. But yeah, spreading the straw.
You'll notice in that picture, there's very little residue on the ground, corn residue, the next year. I mean, it's not going to be a problem planting in that. We at first we planted diagonally across the corn back when I was learning. We don't do it anymore. We just we just go in a straight line. And
But what I was also trying to point out with this picture is it's Molly in the distance coming back with the drill, and you have to look pretty hard to see that the drill has impacted the amount of residue there. It's worked through it, but it's still left it all there.
the pieces are small,
Yeah.
and there aren't that many of them, and
Yeah.
the little pieces are gone because the earthworm can carry those, and
It's a seed drill. It's not turning the soil. It's cutting into it.
Exactly. Yeah.
so
So as
even
long as
for-
it's
even for the-
dry, which happens in the early spring, and it's brittle, so your planting equipment goes through it. And this is the thing that always frustrates me about people looking at green planting or planting into no-till and residue is they look at the whole width instead of just looking at the seed row where the planter's gone. And in most cases, that is as cleaned there as in any conventionally tilled field.
and if you're being affected by the row of corn stalks, doesn't matter a great deal to soybeans.
Right.
They're going to spread anyway,
Yeah.
and so they'll fill any seed that doesn't do well in the in row is of no consequence.
Okay. So let's move on a little bit. We're getting towards the end here, and you guys, because of your experience and history in the no-till, it'll be interesting how you answer these. But for each of the three of you, are there any hurdles that you think no-till puts up, which is why people tend to not jump on the bandwagon.
It's all in your head.
Yeah, it's all between your ears.
It's like I said, we look out at the field in June, early June, when it's below the knee, and you think, hey, geez, those beans look thin and sparse and whatever. And then you go out in the end of July, as they're mid-flower, and it's just a stand, and it covers it. There's those times throughout the year in each crop where you look at it and you might see something that you think you got to fix. And sure, there's some things we tweak as time goes by, but most of those things are perceptive. The real big hurdles, I think the big advantage that we had in going no-till was we did it slowly. The chisel plow was bought in the early mid-'80s. The no-till planter was bought in 2000. There's a lot of time in there for the soils,
Incremental.
the crops, the environment to have adapted to us as we were adapting to it. And so we didn't just simply park the plow last fall and go no-till next year and then see everything in the first year. We were tweaking, and it was a slow migration. We bought the first no-till planter for planting wheat in 1994. And so we knew what it was doing right behind the soybean planter, or soybean harvest, to plant the wheat in the soybean stubble. It was slow, and that slow made us, there was no big hurdles. We were dealing with little ones along the way.
Okay. In soil compaction, I just want to show some pictures of some of your equipment to see how you've adapted it, which is kind of oxymoronic in some ways because you really don't take much of it out in the field. So like here's your combine with, a big amount of rubber on that thing.
So that's the way it came.
It
It had the big singles on the back. It's got 520s, but they're VF tires on the front. So the VF, or those high flexion tires, are sort of the next generation of low compaction radials, where they're designed to carry more weight at the same air pressure, or less air pressure for the same weight, right? Ideally, I would probably have rather seen 620s or 710s on that combine. Certainly got the head for it to have the width. It's the way it came, and we may get there in time, but there's other things, and it's doing okay.
This is not standard.
No, those two Parkers, when we bought those, I don't know, 10 years ago, they came on the typical dump truck tire, the 425 or the 445s. When you drive on the grass, like it's there, and you're into corn harvest, and it's getting it's getting a little moist, the ground's getting a little softer and a little wetter. You could see those tire marks everywhere. We also have some older hopper bottoms that have 315s or 385s on it, and those things, they dent pretty hard.
Yeah.
So I had an opportunity where the front wagon there, I had those tires left over from a small tractor we had, and I looked at it and I pulled one off and I put that on, and I thought, hey, look, it fits, and that's okay. And so then it wasn't very long, I went and I bought the tires on the back wagon. Those are the rims that had 425s on them. I just changed the rubber.
Okay.
And so I spent about $1,000 a tire, or $800 or something. But those wagons run at 25 to 35 pounds. And yes, they squat and they squish, but they're designed to handle that. The only problem that might be is getting the auger under it when you get it in. Or in our case, we have a hopper we put as we're putting it in the pit. But they ride well, and you really can't see where they've been.
But from a soil compaction standpoint, if I go to this next picture, and Rob, every time I've been here, you've been the guy that's been driving the wagons and stuff, and I've never seen you in the field with those wagons. And so you have the roadways and the grass, like the gravel and the roadways. You take this extra step in the compaction, but you never put it in a position where it's really going to compact.
Yeah.
As I said, the driveways are straight. With the grass on the sides, there's room for the airplane wings, so you can take off and land on that. They're straight, flat. There's a little curve in them in places, up and down, but not much. And the grass strips and the grass waterways, and there are places where you can go without causing crop damage, field compaction. And the only thing you turn the wagon around when you get there empty, so that may dry out in the edge of the field, but not very far, and there's nothing in it, and you park it on the driveway.
And you've mentioned the many reasons why you do that, relative to most people would look at that and go, you're giving up yield because you're taking stuff out of production. But you've explained the reasons why that benefits you.
And that's actually counterintuitive. If you don't have the laneway and you don't give up those few acres, you're giving up yield on every other acre that you drive on.
Okay. So this is sort of where it comes home to people that are going to be watching this episode. And so, for each of the three of you, in the system that you've created here and in the concept of no-till, relative to the conventional neighbors around, do you feel you're losing anywhere, giving up anything?
No. We have for the last 10 years or more, we can meet or exceed the provincial average in wheat and soybeans. Corn, not so much, doesn't like this heavy clay soil, but we're there. We're there now. We're seeing where we can, the last few years, we can meet or exceed the provincial average in corn too. So, and this year will be way over it. But yeah, it all those things underneath there are irrelevant to us.
Okay, Max?
Well, I've already looked ahead to the next
Yeah.
slide, so my answer is probably more pertinent there, but I'd say no.
Okay. Robbie?
I don't think so. Maybe a little bit of aesthetics in crops like corn. It doesn't matter enough to me.
Because where you make it is in the fall when the
Yeah.
combine goes through.
Yeah, I'm not too worried.
Okay. And so, same thing to each of the three of you. Where do you feel the wins are for Kaiser Lake Farms because of your system?
So,
All of the above.
yeah, time, labor, those are obvious. I mean, I talked earlier about life balance and all the rest of it, but those are the easy ones. Less labor and less time.
And Rob, for you and Molly, in terms of where you see going with the operation together, you probably don't want to be putting in any more time than you have to. Is there any place? What are your wins in terms of how you see the system?
That's a good question. I kind of agree with Dad's answer. Like there is a lot of not to get away from the farm per se, but to have the time to have the option for extracurriculars, things outside. And were you gonna say something?
Oh, yeah. Well, not only the less time, because it's less time, you can slow down and do it better, do it right, or
Less
enjoy
risk.
that. So, like I said, we never want to exceed 5 miles an hour. If that's all we have to get done is get across the field with a planter, you can take the time to do it right.
A lot of farmers
Yeah.
don't like me saying this, but I think it's very prevalent that I think farmers are so busy 24/7, 365 in the operations. And this is why I did this session last year for the Ag Conference, right sizing the farm for what your goals are and stuff. Like, I want people to be able to enjoy the fact that they're farming. And if all you're doing is running from one task to the next, where do you get that time to enjoy it? And, this is part of the work-life balance, the mental health side of things. I think we need to be more conscious of that. And you guys seem to have created that environment here at Kaiser Lake.
I've seen a lot more of that historically than the next two generations, because I remember back in the 70s planting 24/7. I plant all night because it was good conditions and it needed to get done, and I had a 6-row corn planter. Big deal. Just keep driving.
So here's a generational question as well, and you're all at very different stages of it. Is there anything that would take you back to a more conventional type of tillage
Not a
system?
snowball
Matt,
changing
or
axle.
sorry, Eric? No?
No, never.
Okay. Max?
I gotta say, we just went to the Hastings plowing match last week, and there is something about seeing a really nicely plowed field. There is something about the straightness of the rows, the color of the soil, the smell of that, everything. I'm not fool enough to fall for the nostalgia of it and go back to it on whole, but it is the one thing we miss is seeing the color of the dirt at times and seeing that and smelling that earthy smell. and knowing that things are good by those metrics or perceptions or senses. But and I often will come back to the dollars and cents of it, because that's in this scenario right now, I'm the one that has to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing no-till like effectively as long as I can remember. So for me, it would not be going back to conventional tillage. It would be trying something new. And presently, I don't have any reason to do so. I mean, to answer the question, like if some crazy study came out tomorrow that just suddenly proclaimed we're all barking up the wrong tree, maybe I would do a trial of tillage.
Okay.
But other than that, I don't see a reason.
Good enough.
That's a neat perspective.
Yeah.
We talk about learning from history and whatever else, and Robbie has no history to learn from other than somebody else's, ours.
100%.
But there's nothing wrong with what we're doing in his mind, because he doesn't see any problems that need to be fixed.
But he's still saying, if something comes up, I'm going to explore different things. You're open to learning, which is what we want everybody to be open to, right?
That's what I mean, when I came here, I did all of the conventional things. I could drive a tractor. I bought a plow and a tractor, a 90-horse tractor, which was state of the art at that time. I could plow in a straight line. I could cultivate and disc and plant. I had a seed drill and a corn planter. I could do all those things. But man, it's so much simpler and cheaper and better to do what we're doing now. I would never want to go back to that.
I had one of the farmer or father-son duos in the series say to me when I had this question. The young fella said, "Tillage just seems complicated to me," and I just like that really struck me, right?
Yeah.
And sort of like Robbie's saying it as well in terms of your comment, Rob. It sort of enmeshes.
Yeah, I'm inclined to think that's part of, I mean, not having any experience myself, I'm inclined to think that's part of why so many people are unwilling to give up tillage, because there is so much to it, because you're walking away from so much knowledge and so many things that you do.
And history in the family.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's so much wisdom that goes along with it, like dates to get out there. I wouldn't know any specifics, but
Yeah. I mean, I started heading for no-till 30 years before we did it, because I could see that we had to do something different, and I just had to figure out what and how.
Is there anything next on the list from either of the, like for any of the three of you, that you think you need to explore, or that the system is where you need to be?
The next thing was point 10.
Okay.
It's irrigation.
And you're going down that road, and you're really only a year into it, so
Yeah.
you probably
Yeah.
don't have a good,
And it rained this year.
It rained
so we
all
didn't
year
need
for
it
you.
really.
Yeah.
I get teased by some of the farmers in town, like, "Thanks for putting in that irrigation. We get rain every week." And I'm like, "Hey, you know what? I'm only irrigating half the farm, but every acre's getting water, so it's working for me too," right? But I mean, that's always been our short limiting factor, was water. So it was a no-brainer to want to do it. It came at the right time, and honestly, it had to come last. It had to come after the no-till and the tile drainage and everything else.
So I've known you guys for 24 years, and I've always been surprised by conversations with you about how dry it gets here, which seems so oxymoronic, because you're completely surrounded by water, but all the weather patterns seem to traditionally miss you in the middle of the summer.
Yeah, there's a funny spot between the north end of Prince Edward County and up into Hastings and down to here that just we see it go dry every year, but the access to the water was part of the no-brainer, right? Next steps otherwise, I mean, we're watching for the next evolution and the planters, whatever. The seed drill is the right tool in some ways and not the right tool in every way. Like, it's not maybe the best thing for beans, but again, I've done side-by-sides, and we're not giving up anything. And being able, the next step that really started this year was Robbie was planting corn and Molly was planting beans. We were planting at the same time. And that's the first time in a long time that we've had two planters running simultaneously. It goes back into the 90s when we had a seed drill and a corn planter. But again, it took 2 people, it took 2 machines, it took the right timing, and so having the 2 of them at a point where they can do those things, and that was the next step, and so
Good. Any advice to others that are part of this is to try and say to people, here's a whole bunch of different people doing no-till. Are the little pieces of the puzzle from each of them that might resonate with you? What is your advice to people in terms of starting this?
Number one is the drainage, and it is number one. And the number two is don't no-till the back 40. Do it next to the road where you can see it and the neighbors can see it, and you'll learn more there if you think you want to try it. We didn't try it. There isn't a corn planter made that won't plant no-till, period. Yes, the soil gets better after many years of doing it, and even including the years when we were getting there. But yeah,
yeah, I would say similarly, but with a slightly different bent, you can set yourself up to fail. And so if you're exploring it, don't take some of those things lightly, like the drainage or whatever else. And if you see a fail, question where the fail was, because if it's drainage related, that had nothing to do with the planter you chose or the crop you're planting. Like, you can almost always explain the failures, and it's probably had nothing to do with what you first thought. So the idea of exploring no-till is you have to do a little bit of background. You have to make sure you're in the right soil, the right drainage pattern, whatever, because you can also set yourself up to fail very easily.
But some of that failure goes back to one of your earlier comments, Max, about mindset.
Yeah.
Is you've got to believe you can do it, which is what Eric, you say that all the time.
Yeah, and that's the same thing. Don't do a half-assed trial at the back farm where you don't care if it fails.
Yes.
Do a good trial at the front of the farm where you care if it fails, because you're going to be judged not only by yourself, but by everybody who drives by.
Yeah.
And if you have to look at it every day and see that mistake, you're probably going to do a better job of trying it.
Okay.
That's a good point.
So that brings us to the end, guys. Thank you very much for being part of this. And any last comments, Max?
I'm almost never on Twitter, so if you're hoping for a response, you're not going to get one. You should probably look for Dad, which is Eric Kaiser, not P. Max Kaiser.
I'll put that in there then. Okay. But you guys are comfortable with having people contact you to chat?
They always have.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
always. I tell everybody who says anything, I said, you're always welcome. Come for a visit.
Okay.
Or if I've had phone calls with people from across the province. They've seen us in articles or whatever, or met us at the Soil and Crop Annual or the Innovative Farmers, and they reach out and ask, because I was thinking of doing this. And I've also had farmers just down the road. Same thing. I had a guy last summer who was asking about cropping, and he had some questions on. All I can tell you, and I say this to everybody, we're experts on what we do here and what has worked for us. Will it work for you? Maybe, maybe not. But if you're going to try it, these are some things I might caution. And that's the best we can do. But we're glad to do it. I never have a problem stopping and talking.